Can't you just unload around me? So this happened earlier today and was too perfect to not share with you guys. I work in construction as the foreman for a new house build. The location is kinda strange. The house is 250 feet up a hill via a footpath only. All of our materials have to come up this footpath by hand. It's a pain in the ass to manually carry, quite literally, an entire house up this hill. One of our saving grace is having the 2 parking spots on the street at the bottom of this hill marked with official no parking signs. Unfortunately, there is an elementary school about half a block away and the parents of children seem to regularly, at least twice a day, think it's okay to park in our spots. Now I consider myself a reasonable person, so if someone is parked in the spot and we don't have a delivery or a need to park a truck, I will let it go. If we need the spots and there's someone parked there, however, I will ask them to move nicely, and most of the time they do so immediately. Until today. I get a phone call from the lumber delivery truck that is en route to our location. He says he'll be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. I let him know I will meet him on the street and make sure he has space to park. He's carrying all of the material to frame the roof of our house, which is a lot of really big lumber and will take easily an hour to bring up the hill, so naturally I didn't want him parked in the middle of the street with his hazards on for an hour when we have a perfectly good parking spot for him. As I begin my trip down the hill, I notice a school parent sitting in her car idling. Assuming she's just waiting to pick up her child, I walk up to her car and politely let her know that she is parked in a no parking zone and we need her to clear it to park a delivery truck. She scoffs at me and rudely states back, "I'll just be a few minutes, and your truck isn't here, take a chill pill, dude." Before I can respond, a giant lumber truck comes around the corner and I wave to him, and then gesture towards him to the woman in the car who has now put her window back up to ignore me. I put on my best customer service smile and wave at her through the window. She put it down halfway and angrily shouts, "What?" By now the truck has pulled up alongside her car and I politely ask her again, with a stronger tone of voice, to move her vehicle, reminding her that she is illegally parked in a tow-away zone. Then she gives me this wonderful idea. She says, "Can't you guys just unload around me?" Jesus, it's not that hard. I give her another smile and walk away, a brilliant plan forming in my head. I instruct the delivery driver to park as close to her as possible and block her in with the porta potty that is at one end of our reserve spots and the parked car that is parked just adjacent to our spots on the other end. He smiles because he immediately gets what I'm trying to do, and proceeds to expertly block this lady and her car into a little 2-parking spot jail. We unstrap the lumber and my guys begin humping material up the hill. Meanwhile, I call the police parking enforcement to let them know the situation. At this point I wasn't trying to get her in trouble, I just wanted a record of why we were blocking part of the street so we don't get in trouble with the city. The very friendly traffic officer lets me know that she can be there in about 30 minutes and deal with the situation for me. Wonderful. As we continue to unload lumber, the child of the parent shows up, and wouldn't you know it, mom is just now realizing that the lumber truck is parked so close she can't get out of her driver's door to meet her kid. She awkwardly clambers across the inside of her car and stumbles out the passenger door, shooting glaring looks at me and the truck driver in the process. She loads her kid into the back and then begins to realize that she has no way of leaving. She comes storming up to myself and the driver and states, "I'm in a big hurry, you need to move your damn truck right now so I can go." Before I can respond, the driver gets a grin on his face and says, "Ma'am, to unload the lumber on the truck we had to unstrap it, and per our company policy I'm not allowed to move the truck with any unsecured load on it. Sorry." This sends her into near aneurysm levels of blood pressure. Meanwhile, I can barely contain my laughter. "F your policy, I have somewhere to be." She barks back at him. At this point, with impeccably convenient timing, the parking enforcement officer shows up and parks behind the truck. She doesn't see the officer arrive, and while the officer is still getting out of her vehicle I just casually say, "Can't you just pull out around it? It's not that hard." With the biggest shit-eating grin I've ever had, I watch as she realizes that I just used her line on her. "F you." She yells, storms back to her car, and angrily clambers back in through the passenger door and into the driver's seat. At this point the officer is walking up to myself and the driver. Before she can even introduce herself, the mom in the car slams it into reverse and stomps on the gas, crashing into our porta potty and knocking it over, and then throws the car into drive and tries to mount the curb and drive on the sidewalk. The officer, driver and I are staring in disbelief as she gets halfway over the curb and gets stuck. I can hear her screaming obscenities over the idling truck from inside her car. The officer promptly walks up to the door of the car and orders her out. My favorite part of the entire thing is watching her face go to shock as she realized she just did all of that in front of a police officer. She gets slapped in cuffs as the parking officer calls for a second unit, and she is promptly sat on the very curb she tried to drive over. She sits on the curb yelling to the now 2 officers about how we told her she could stay there and that we never asked her to move. The traffic officer responds that she was the one who was originally called when she first refused to move and that she already knows what was going on. While myself and the driver are reporting to the second officer, my guys finish moving the remainder of the lumber and the driver finishes his statement and takes off to go back to the yard. By the end of the ordeal she was arrested, and charged with child endangerment. Her kid was in the back of the car the whole time, reckless driving, destruction of property, the porta potty, and driving on a suspended license. On top of all that, she also got her car towed. The kid went home with his grandma and she went to spend some quality time in a cell. I never expected her to heed my advice to just pull out around it. But I think next time she'll probably think twice about parking in a tow-away zone if she ever gets a license again. Man on my patio. Okay, so this happened when I was around 9 years old, 25 now, and it's something I will never forget. It gives me goosebumps to this day. I live in a terraced house, 4 houses combined, and my neighbors and I each have our little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks and so on. Only a small fence separates my small yard and patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area, with several of these terraced houses spread around my neighborhood, so seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I live maybe 50 meters away from school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone for around an hour before she got home. This one day I got home from school. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure I locked the front door and double-check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I was 9, and being alone was a little scary even though it was in the middle of the day and only for 1 hour. I then rushed to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room was located 1 floor over the patio, with a view of the road I told you about before. It was kinda like the sound of a cat. But my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked and I thought, OMG, did he finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it was my cat, but the sight that met me gives me goosebumps just writing this. A guy was standing on my patio. A tall guy with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring women or something. I could hear him making high-pitched sounds, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was eating from the ashtray. I was frozen observing this, eventually snapped out of it, and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react, he kept on eating from the ashtray. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in bed under my sheets, shivering with fear, I hear these creepy high-pitched noises from the guy eating cigarette stomps from the ashtray on my patio. I kinda blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy saying stuff like, "What are you doing? Get over here or we will come down and arrest you," and so on. He didn't respond, but the high-pitched sounds were more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now that the cops were there. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence, 1 man and a woman. I did not see the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me in my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing the creepy guy screaming louder than anything I'd ever heard before. He charged the female police officer with full force, and he effing knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately taxed the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, screaming still. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually made it. After a while, he managed to wake up the female police officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else because he just looked at me and said, "I sure as hell hope you didn't see all that." I started to cry. By this time neighbors started to arrive wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and left. Before they left they promised to come back and talk to us about what had happened. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped a facility where mentally challenged people lived, located around 5 kilometers from where I live. He explained that the guy had been living in my house 5 years ago, but he had been forced to move when his mom, his only caretaker, died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom in my house. He missed the routines and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago because he was extremely strong. From what I heard, he had extreme tensions in the body because of the autism, making his muscles grow stronger and stronger throughout the years. This was the reason he reacted the way he did when the police came this day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure this would never happen again. He promised it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life got back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back. Until 1 year ago. At this time my mom and dad had moved out. I bought the house from them and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stands there, looking at me. I look at him and give him a nod, and then I hear the high-pitched noises. Holy shit, it's him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize. My heart started racing and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to escape again. Because I kept my cool a bit longer than when was 9, I started to realize how sorry I felt for the guy. 16 years later and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think he would knock me out like he did to that police officer. He didn't. He smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I offered him to sit down. He didn't respond. I offered him to come inside. He started laughing. We went inside. His face lit up, pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom. It almost made me tear up. All of a sudden he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything to him. I realized I had to call the facility to let them know. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up, crying, and they went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later. We made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday from the day he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlight of his week. It makes my heart warm. Now, for several years my thoughts were let's not meet, the guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. Now my thoughts are let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons, my friend Tom. My hag of a stepmom gave away my PlayStation 4 while I was away in college. So I rent out her house while she was on her honeymoon with her newest husband. I'm an only son. My mom passed away from ovarian cancer at only 55 5 years ago. It broke my dad's heart. They had been together since college and were the same age, with my dad being a month older. I'm 22 and am about to graduate college with my degree in chemistry when the main events start to occur. I went to college on a full-ride scholarship. This is important later. My dad met my now stepmom when she was my mom's nurse at the hospital where she spent her final days. My stepmom Grace played all the right notes to gain my dad's trust. She was empathetic to him, nurturing, and comforting after my mom passed. I was 17 and old enough to sense that she was just trying to weasel her way into getting my dad's resources, but it was up to my dad if he wanted to be in a relationship with her. I was in my final year of public school and had just won a scholarship to attend college out of the country the following year. My dad mourned my mom for a year, and that whole time Grace would check in on him by phone every month or so, in my opinion, to scope out the possibility of sinking her hooks in him. After a year passed, Grace took the gloves off and went hard after my dad. Grace was only 40 when she and my dad started seeing each other. I didn't like her, but at the same time my dad at least didn't seem so depressed anymore, so I tried to be less pessimistic about her and give her the benefit of the doubt. In my gut, I didn't trust her, though. But we are Scandinavian, and at least in my family, the son does not tell his father what to do or even offer any opinion. Grace is from the Czech Republic, if you're wondering. My father was a very successful banker during his career and amassed quite a portfolio of wealth. I'll spare you the details, but after 6 months of dating, Grace and my father are married. My dad never really got over my mom though, and he was getting weaker and weaker even though he was only 57. Since his health was fading, he called me to him and asked me point blank, "Boy, what do you need to set you up in this life?" I told him I don't need anything, I'm a man and can take care of myself. But what are you even talking about, Dad? You're going to be around for decades yet. I did remind him that he had living sisters with children, my aunts and cousins. I also reminded him that I had a full scholarship to college, so don't worry about giving me any cash. He was gone only a year later at 59. I of course have seen lots of Hollywood movies, so I consider the conspiracy theory that maybe my dad's nurse wife poisoned him and made him sign over all his money to her, but I honestly do not think that's what happened. Other relatives didn't like Grace either, but they knew my dad was totally in love with my mom and that her passing utterly broke him. Well, long story short, my dad bequeathed his 5-bedroom house to me even though I wasn't expecting it and didn't ask for it. He gave a small endowment to each of his sisters and their children. He left about 80% of all his existing money to Grace, which amounted to several hundreds of thousands of dollars. My dad ignored me because he was generous to a fault and still gave me several tens of thousands of dollars, which were of course very useful to me. Grace tried to put on a friendly front, but I could tell she was angry as hell that she didn't get my dad's house, too. That belonged to me, and I had the legal papers to prove it. She was especially mad because we live in an extremely upscale and trendy location, and houses are hard to come by and easily sold for massive profits. During the first few months after my dad's passing, I had the nauseating, creepy experience of knowing that Grace was trying to feel me out to see if I might be in a little relationship with her. Gross. She still stayed at the house though, because over the last 3 years, she had gotten used to living there and acting like she owned it. And, even though I officially owned it, I was always away at college and only visited my dad's old house once every couple of months, and even then it wasn't to see Grace but to see my cousins who lived just a few miles away. I downplayed the fact that it was my house, and over the months I think Grace gradually forgot that she had no legal right to the house. She probably believed that sooner or later, because I never asked her for any of the hundreds of thousands of my dad's dollars that she now had, I was somehow independently wealthy and would just give up my house to her. I knew I'd eventually hydrogen bomb this BTCH when she started dating some new guy only 5 months after my dad was in the ground, and one time when I came home from college after graduating, she and her new boyfriend, some sleazy looking D-bag named Ivan who was only a few years older than me, were acting like I was a guest in my own house and that they owned it. I played along. Grace told me she gave away my PlayStation 4 to Ivan's cousin because I'm too old to play video games. I don't even know this guy and you give him my PS4 to give away to some other crap who I also don't know? I quickly changed all my network passwords that same day. I smiled, but I knew what I had to do eventually. She also said that she and Ivan were getting married because I just can't mourn your father forever. I have to move on with life. I tell her that I graduated college and already secured employment with a local firm, and will soon find a new place to live. She looks thrilled. Especially the part where it looks like I'll soon have a new place to live. Then in a patronizing way, she tells me, "You always have a place in our house though, you are welcome to stay whenever you please." Thanks, Grace, really generous of you. What I say is that I will probably have a new place in 3 months. She says that is wonderful because she intends to go to her homeland to have a wedding with Ivan and afterward have her honeymoon. She assures me it's a local affair, otherwise I'd invite you, honey. And anyway, I know you're so busy. I congratulate her. She asks me if I can watch the house for her. Watch my own house? Sure. What I say is of course I will take care of the house. I am careful to not say your house. She and her D-bag fiancé, who I am 100% sure is only there for Grace's money, go on their trip and I immediately put out advertisements on rental websites offering to lease my house. I hire movers and have all of Grace's furniture and possessions boxed up and put into a storage rental facility. I retain all of my parents' furniture that they had before my dad met Grace. Locks? Changed. All of them. Within days, I am inundated with dozens of inquiries regarding my amazing, furnished house with fantastic views. I rent it to a wonderful young family. A barrister and a schoolteacher wife and their 2 preteen children. They pay me their first and last month's rent, and sign a lease for a year. I warn them about my crazy stepmom who thinks this is her house, but I present them with contact information to my lawyer, the same lawyer my dad retained, in case they need any assurance that I'm on the level. I also give my lawyer the information about the storage facility, including the fact that I generously paid for 4 months of storage in advance, which is a whole month longer than Grace's Czech honeymoon adventure. I then found a great apartment in the city near my new place of work. There I met a woman in a restaurant I frequent at night after a long workday. We have been dating for 6 months now and are engaged to be married. Grace of course tried to shriek and cause trouble when she realized she got kicked out of my house, but my lawyer quickly shut her mouth without my having to ever speak to her garbage face again. From what I hear, she and her trash husband left the country and I assume they're blowing through my dad's money and will soon be broke like chavs usually become when they taste a little bit of what they think is a good life. So maybe Grace will go and try to exploit some other lonely man into giving her his money. Speaking of money, the house that I rent out is generating so much money that I not only can help pay for my cousin's college, but I moved into a larger apartment of my own, together with my fiancée. I love my job but really, I could survive solely on renting my dad's old house. And to think, if Grace had only been cooler and nicer I might have let her stay at the house, just to be a good sport. And definitely, if she stayed the hell out of my room. But no, she had to act all proprietary, so I had to make her homeless as a wedding gift. Postscript. I bought another PS4, even though I didn't even use my old one that much. It didn't matter. It wasn't for Grace to give away. You don't give away other people's things. You give away your things. Which is why I chose to kick Grace out of my house. Because it's mine, and I decide who stays there.